Why didn't that go into the TVs? Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sacramento Storytellers Guild November program. And my theme for today is changes. Could be anything the storytellers or poets want to share. Today, we have a myriad of stories and poems, anywhere from a bark beetle to a trip in the Amazon. We're going to hear it all, and I'm so glad everyone is here to join us. Our first speaker for today is none other than John Petrick. And John says he's spent his life in the frigid north of the US before retiring to Davis, talk about a change, in 2019. Here he discovered our Sacramento Storytellers Guild and has been writing and telling stories ever since. John has shared stories with the Sacramento Association of California's genre series, the Telebration, which is coming up, the Sacramento Guild, and via Zoom and in person in several groups on the East Coast, primarily in Maine, because that's where his children live. And he writes, he can't get away from that frigid northern tier. His title today is A Trip Long Ago. A Trip Long Ago. Let's welcome John Petrick.
Thank you so much. Well, the theme for this month is change. So after several changes of heart, changes of mind, I arrived at a story. You see, change changes us. Life happens, but nothing changes you quite like kids. So this is a true story of change and adaptation that really happened. So about 25 years ago, and my kids are like 12, 10, and 9, I planned this big trip to the East Coast. This was going to be the trip of a lifetime. We're going to get on the White House tour. We were going to see all the historic monuments. We're going to hit the beaches. We're going to go to the amusement parks, everything. This was going to be a trip the kids would never forget. Except I forgot one thing, that they were just kids. So we started out great. We flew into Philadelphia. We took our first metro ride into downtown Philly to Independence Square. And Independence Square is where so much of America started. There's Independence Hall, where the Continental Congress met and the Declaration of Independence was signed. And then Philadelphia was the capital before Washington, D.C. So there's the first Capitol building and the first Supreme Court building. And all of these buildings are just these small, modest buildings that, like Independence Hall is maybe 2 tennis courts, 3 tennis courts big. So it just shows our very humble beginnings of this country, and yet also captures some really high ideals. So from Philadelphia, we go south, we rent a van and we go south into Virginia. We camp on the beach. Oh, I forgot to say, we did stop at the beach for a couple of days too. Then we camp on the beach down there and we use that as our center of our, place to drive from. We go to Williamsburg, Virginia. And Williamsburg was the colonial capital of Virginia during the time it was a colony. So during that time period, as a colonial capital, all the big names spent lots of time in Virginia. So Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Patrick Henry, all these people are all over the place. But what I found the coolest was this old Anglican church. And back in those days, the wealthy families bought these big pews in the front. And at the very front was the Washington pew. So that was where George Washington used to sit, right there. And anyway, the kids loved Williamsburg because there's horses and carriages and people in costume and craftsmen and all that kind of stuff. We also went to Yorktown and saw where the British surrendered to the Americans. And then Dad got smart and took the kids to Six Flags for a day, and they got to ride all the rides. So then from there, we were going to go inland. We were going to go across the state of Virginia to the western side where the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. And but we had one stop along the way, and that was at Jamestown Colony. So Jamestown, if you remember, was the first permanent English settlement in North America. So we get to Jamestown, we park the van, and the kids would not get out of the car. And there's no yelling or screaming or anything. They were just done. So Becky and I get out, we do a quick run through Jamestown, and the kids stayed in the car. Okay, so we still got like a week of touring left. What are we gonna do? Kids can't stay in the car for a whole week. So we drive to our destination, Western Virginia, get a hotel, a pizza, movie, stick the kids in the hotel, and Becky and I go out for dinner and drinks to plot our strategy. And our strategy was we surrender. We decided we were going to cut 3 or 4 days off of our trip. So the next morning we rebooked our flights. We did stop in Western Virginia at one place. We stopped at Jefferson's home in Monticello, and then we just zipped into Washington, D.C. And so we get into DC and it's late in the afternoon. We just wander around. You can actually, back in those days, wander into this US Capitol building and go up and down the halls. There was no security back then. So, but then the next day, our first full day in DC, you know, we had 4 days of stuff that I had planned. So we had to really get organized if we were going to see all this stuff in 2 days. And so we, first place is the Smithsonian Museum. We go to the Smithsonian and it's hot and humid, like DC is hot and humid. And after maybe only an hour or two, we're just like, everybody's just dragging and burnt out. And it's like, okay, nobody's having any fun. We go back to the hotel. Everybody goes for a swim. We have lunch. Everybody goes for another swim. We take naps. Everybody goes for another swim. So it's like late afternoon by the time we get out of the hotel. And so we just kind of go wandering along the Capitol Mall, and we come to the Washington Monument, and it's late in the day. It's almost closing time, and there's no lines. So we were just able to walk right in and go up the Capitol, up the Washington Monument. And then we're just, you know, again, not really having any plans because all the plans have been crushed. We just start rambling, and we run into the World War II Memorial. And then we run into the Vietnam Vets Memorial, which is so moving in its starkness. And then from there, you can see the Lincoln Memorial over there. So then we wandered over to the Lincoln Memorial. And even though it's just this big square building with a picture with a statue of Lincoln sitting in this chair with a few of his quotes, somehow it just captures this horrendous time of American history when hundreds of thousands of Americans were killing each other on battlefields from Mississippi to Pennsylvania, and the terrible burden that took on that president. And then we could see that, you know, we were almost on the water, and there's another path that goes along the water. I don't know if it's the Potomac or the Tidal Basin, but we go take that path, and we run into the FDR Memorial. And so this is Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president during the second greatest crisis of American history, that being the Great Depression, as well as World War II, of course. And the statues there of the people in the bread lines and stuff, very moving. Even the kids were very moved by that. And then we just followed this path down the water. And we get to the Jefferson Memorial. And Jefferson was like always kind of my hero. And we even named our son, his middle name is Jefferson. And there's all this nice idyllic phrases from Jefferson all over his memorial, but somehow it just didn't have the same moving feel that the Lincoln Memorial and the FDR Memorial did. That, these were the guys that actually led the ship of state through their toughest times. And then we just got back to the hotel, and this is totally unplanned. And like my wife said, it was almost a miracle. Everything just fell together. Kids enjoyed it. I forgot to say, as the night went on, it got cooler and cooler too, which helped a lot. So anyway, so we just had one more day then in DC. And I don't even remember what we did. But we had promised the kids we're going to take them to dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe. They had to go to the Hard Rock Cafe. So we drive our rental van over to the Hard Rock Cafe. We park and getting out of the car, and this girl comes up and asks me for a quarter. And I go, oh, what's a quarter? And I give her a quarter. And then we go to dinner, and then we're walking back toward our van. And I see there's 3 of these girls begging quarters. And they're taking them back to this guy who's sitting on this bench directly next to our van. And this guy on this bench has bags full of quarters. So he's obviously pimping these girls out. So let's get out of here. So we get in our van, and I pull out my map. This is back in the old days of maps. My city map of DC. And this is like the biggest map I'd ever seen. And it covers the entire dashboard of this van. And I'm trying to find, and there's all these one ways and dead ends, and I'm trying to figure out where we're going. And this pimp, he says, where are you guys going? And we say, well, we're going north to Philadelphia to catch our plane. We got to catch the freeway to Philadelphia. And he says, well, you just go boom, 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 boom. So we follow his directions, about 3 turns and 10 blocks, and we're on the freeway to Philadelphia. So that quarter, that was the best change I ever spent. So that is my story of change and acceptance. We never did get to go to the White House tour. That was one of the days that we canceled, but otherwise it was a very memorable trip. And if you've learned anything from this story, you can keep the change. So thank you.
Thank you, John, for that story of change, not expected, but enjoyed. Our second storyteller is Sir Lawrence. And Sir Lawrence has been with the Guild since 1996. And although he's blind, he tells wonderful adventure tales, whether fictional or non-fictional. But today's story that he's sharing is from a 1982 Disney movie that wasn't an adaptation from a book, but actually from a newspaper article. His title, Night Crossing. Sir Lawrence, Night Crossing.
Hey, Larry.
In East Germany, or known as the German Democratic Republic, the communist section of Germany was a very sad and very unhappy area. Most people were chagrined about being behind the Iron Curtain, and many people tried to escape to go to West Germany, where they saw West Germany prospering and East Germany was not. Well, this story is is a true story about two families that attempted to escape East Germany by hot air balloon. It was a daring escape, and they had to work very quietly and secretly for fear that the government would find out about them. They had to sew the material to make the balloon in their attic late at night. They had to make a makeshift burner for the hot air balloon and make a basket to hold 8 people, 2 families. They were very close together in friendship, and they knew that they had to trust each other. They attempted in April, and they didn't quite make it because they ran out of fuel, and they didn't quite make it to the wall. They were short about a mile, and they had to walk back through tripwires and other devices that would destroy their feet if they didn't work right. Then they knew that the government was going to be looking for them, and they had to make a decision. We need to do it now or risk being imprisoned or killed. So they remade the hot air balloon with materials that they had to gather from many parts of the city. For they went into a lunch shop, and the proprietor called the authorities suspicious that they were doing something wrong, and they left the shop right away. They quietly built their nets, and they targeted the date of September 15th, 1979. At that time, they had everything done, and they looked at each other and said, do we want to do it? Yes, they all said, we're all in. So they carried the material to the spot where they were going to take off. And as they rose up into the air in the night sky at 2 a.m., they saw the police raiding their homes just 5 minutes after they had left. They went into the clouds to try to hide and hoped that the wind would blow them toward the west. They used the fuel sparingly, but yes, they were spotted and spotlights were placed onto them. They went further and further, and they did land in West Germany. They landed on the street, and they saw a policeman, and they went up to them and said, are we really in West Germany? Yes, said the policeman, confused. And they started shouting and hugging each other and say, hooray, we made it to West Germany. Many years later, Germany was put together as one whole country. And one of the families went back to where they used to live, but the other family stayed in Bavaria, near Munich. And this is a true story that was beyond belief, that no one had ever successfully escaped East Germany by a hot air balloon. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, for that very interesting story. I remembered that movie when he first called and talked about it. And I also talked to my children about it, if they remembered it. It was a powerful movie, and I thank Larry for telling us that story. Now we are blessed with a poet. Her name is Jennifer O'Neill Pickering. And Jennifer is a literary and visual artist, a pushcart nominee for poetry, and a finalist in the New Woman's Voice chapbook competition. Fruit Box Castles, poems from a Peach Rancher's Daughter, is available on the Finishing Line Press. Oh, she even brought us some here for sale. Thank you. Her prose has been published in Pen Dust Radio, Raven's Perch, Voices, an Offering of Fruit, and was shortlisted for the Word Runner e-chapbooks fiction series. And Jennifer is being modest, but Jennifer is also a songwriter. She sent me, which was just wonderful, she sent me actually a poem that was to music. Thank you, Jennifer. Her title are Poems from the Peach Rancher's Daughter. Let's welcome Jennifer O'Neill Pickering.
Thank you. I hope it's okay if we sing a song.
Yes.
This is my husband, Mike. Where do you want me to stand, Mike?
Wherever you want.
So it'll be a cappella. But I'm not totally a cappella, but you know what I mean? We're not amplified. I'll try to sing pretty loud. So this one is called Daddy Loved Mama, and it is in my book, Fruit Box Castles.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. I forgot. One little bit.
That's okay. And it's basically, it is autobiographical. It's sad, it's kind of sad as it sounds, but it is autobiographical.
Gotta get quieter strap.
And Mike's a musician and a songwriter. He's also a poet. He should see if he could be a poet here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, he's one, he's good. Okay, and just nod at me so I don't. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't know I had to. Daddy left Mama before I was born. Left her with 2 kids on a 2-bit peach farm. Ran off with another, had raven black hair. Left Mama pregnant too, babe she bare. Daddy was a dreamer, this I was told. Looking for greener pastures that had already sold. Went down to Mexico, took all Mama's dough. Grew cotton in Sonora, but you know he never struck gold. Now a heart can grow fickle, this surely is true. Someone's always bound to lose. When the red heart of passion mixes with blue, and the heart grows purple, just like a bruise. Now I didn't see my daddy till I was just 3, and you know that's not how it's meant to be. When he held me in his arms, I wailed and I cried, 'cause even a wee one knows where the daddy lies. Now a heart can grow fickle, this surely it's true. Someone's always bound to lose. When the red heart of passion mixes with blue, and the heart turns purple, just like a bruise. Now I forgave my daddy after calling him every word in the dictionary dirtier than dirt. But you know, be damned. I turned out just like him, and you know what? Possibly worse. A dreamer painting pictures, writing useless verse. A dreamer painting pictures, last verse. Yeah, I was gonna say, some people have told me, no, you shouldn't say a dreamer painting pictures, write useless verse, but it's a bit of humor. I do have one other poem. Can I read it? It's another poem about change, short. And I wrote it when I read at a winery a few years back. I wrote this poem. I think last time when I came here, I read a poem about beer. Well, this is because I was going to read at a brewery. And this one's about wine. There's some wine back there. It's called The Winey Poem. They were a perfect blend, a first crush, a deux de tarte, and one handy with a corkscrew. Made each other blush, thought if only we could bottle what we had, grew drunk on sangria, each other and plunk, until they could afford the expensive reserve. But alas, they didn't age well. When did the noble rot begin? When did one become so flabby and the other a brute? How had they become bungs and cold ducks? One of them thought, I care not about bright, feel like something pink or bubbly, a Blanc de Nord, an overture that plays a champagne flute that will pop my cork, make a hole in this midlife crisis, and the ceiling. That something slipped off the shelf at Trader Joe's. The jilted lover thought, that will soon go flat, sought complexity, stillness, experimented with sack and sherry, explored varietals, embraced the avocado, settled on fruity with a hint of spice, naughty with a nice finish, decided most were just wet dickies anyway, and took a lesson from the wine. Breathe.
Oh, wow. Such wonderful poems and song. That was the one she sent me, and I was so impressed with it. I'm so glad I got to hear it in person. Our next teller, well, he's been around a while. We all know him, Ed Lewis. And he says he's an adventurer traveler who shares stories with children in schools and with adults as he explores new areas. And we've all had a chance, I think, to hear at least a couple stories. But one summer, we know Ed meandered the entire length of the Amazon River from Brazil through Colombia to Peru. But he didn't end his adventure then. He decided that he would start on a journey, and he hiked the ancient Inca Trail for 3 days over mountains, he said, that were 11 and 12,000 feet, till he finally arrived at Machu Picchu, which, if anyone knows, you're out of breath by the time you get up there. He is going to share a story that emerged from this trip that he took. Before I tell you the title, he had a little note on the bottom, which was very intriguing. He says, at the end of the story, you all have an opportunity to become multimillionaires. Are you impressed? His title, a special business opportunity, Ed Lewis.
All right, well, this is your lucky day, folks, because I am going to share a discovery I made at the mouth of the Amazon River in Brazil in 1979. Now, this has been brewing within me for 40 years, and I'm going to bring it to fruition with hopefully some of your help. Now, like early investors in Microsoft and Starbucks, today, and only today, is your opportunity to join me in investing in this spectacular, amazing, multi-million-dollar, or probably more like a multi-billion-dollar company. So let me take you to where this idea began. I was planning a trip to the Amazon River, and I would go the length of the Amazon River, like you were told here, and then go up into Colombia and Ecuador and Peru, hike the old Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, which I did. But the part I'm going to tell you about is the beginning of this journey. It began in Los Angeles. I drove with my girlfriend at the time and her 5- and 7-year-old daughter from Los Angeles to Chicago. We had some amazing camping experiences in the Grand Canyon, the hot springs in Arkansas. And when we were coming into Austin, Texas, it was getting late. We were going to stay there that night, and we were camping mostly. But that night we were going to do a hotel. And all of us, Carol's driving, and all of a sudden, Carol, I feel like I'm going to die. Get me to a hospital right away. And I didn't know what was going on. I felt like I was dying. I was in intense pain. I had no idea what was going on. And so she pulled into this hospital, and all I remember is being shot up with something, throwing up, and waking up the next morning in a hospital bed. And I went, what in the hell is going on here? What actually happened to me? I didn't feel any pain. I felt fine. And the doctor came in and he said, well, you have a classic symptom of a particular issue. What is that, sir? And he said that you likely have a kidney stone. And he says, what's a kidney stone? What does that mean? He said, well, what happens is your body has produced a kidney stone. And when it falls down into your urethra, that's when you feel the pain. And apparently it can come back up, it can go back down until you pass it. It could be a problem. He said, people sometimes, like you feel fine now. That means the kidney stone came back out of your urethra and is up in your kidney, just floating around, which isn't a good thing. Your stone could be any size. So I said, okay, so what am I going to do? I am going down the Amazon River here in about a week. He went, well, we've got a couple options. We can take you in, and I have this really cool little probe that's got a fish hook kind of basket on the end. We call it Harold the Plunger. And what we do is we'll just give you a spinal tap, and so you won't feel anything. And then we take Harold and we run a catheter up your penis and up into where we find the stone blocking your urethra. And then we take little Harold and he kind of grabs it and we pull it back down. No problem. Unless it just happens to come out on your own. But so I would recommend doing that. And so what's the chance? Is this going to work? He said, well, it's a 50-50. Sometimes they get it. Sometimes Harold knocks it back up into the kidney, and then we just have to wait. He says, sometimes there's airline pilots that have this. It goes on for 10 years, and then all of a sudden it hits them, and hopefully they're not flying the plane when that happens. Okay, well, let's do it. So down the next morning, the operating room, and I feel, he said, here, he showed me this needle. I went, oh my God, it's a huge needle. And So we just put it in the bottom of your spine. And they're talking to me while they're doing this. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was just shot through the roof. This pain was intense. I don't know if any of you have ever had a spinal tap, but it was unbelievable. And but then of course I went numb. And so they went to work, and and I went out, and they woke me up a little bit later. I was up in the room. I said, okay, am I clear? Said, nah, Harold had a problem. So we couldn't get it. It's back up in your kidney. I went, well, what in the hell am I going to do now? I said, well, if we'll wait about 2 days and we can try again. This time we can't give you a spinal tap, but we can give you, regular anesthetic, injection and put you out, and, we'll try again, get it, Okay, what the heck? So Carol and the kids are playing around Austin. They'd never been there before. They got a nice little hotel room. They come and visit me during the day. And he said, because I didn't feel any pain, he said, we're putting on the IV because you get lots of liquids, and hopefully this will flush it back down into your urethra, or if you're lucky enough, it'll pass through. If it's not, depends on the size. I don't know how big it is. And so he said, walk around the room a lot. Spend your day walking around the room, do a little jogging if you can, and maybe it'll just pop back down in there, and then we can go for it. Well, that did work, and it came on. I felt the pain again. They take me down in, and they're hitting me up with this IV, and I'm just starting to go into la la land, and this nurse comes into the surgery room. It's just, stop the procedure. The doctor can't make it. And in my haze, I'm going, what? And then they took out the IV and then back up to the room. And what had happened was, this is 1979, and I don't know if you remember this, but there was an oil embargo from the OPEC oil companies who had these huge gas lines. People couldn't get gas, and the doctor couldn't get gas to get in to do this surgery in time. So then he comes in, he's, oh, I'm so sorry. And that was back up in my kidney. I didn't feel any pain. And he says, well, we can wait a couple more days. I said, I can't wait a couple more days. I have to be from Chicago. I was flying to Miami for a flight that was once a week down to Belém, Brazil, which is at the mouth of the Amazon. So, and I had this whole trip planned. A month here, I was going to meet Carol up in Bogota. We were going to do the Machu Picchu thing and all this. And I had it all mapped out in the time frame, and I had a month to go up this length of the Amazon. I said, I have to go. I can't wait any longer. And I said, so what am I going to do? He said, well, you can cancel your trip to the Amazon. I would recommend that. I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going. And he said, well, I'll give you some pain pills. And what you should do if anything happens down there is, you're out in the middle of nowhere, find some good local beer, take these pain pills, drink a whole bunch of it, and hopefully you'll pass the stone. Okay, so anyway, I did. I got to Miami, and I was getting ready on my flight, and it was 4 a.m. for a 6 o'clock flight. I go to check in, and they said, visa? I said, visa? I need a visa? You didn't need a visa for anywhere in South America. I didn't know this, but Brazil at the time, you had to have a visa. I didn't have a visa. I said, well, let me just get on and get there. I'll show them my pay. Nope, can't go unless you get a visa. Well, how am I going to get a visa? You'll have to go to the embassy, which opened at 10 o'clock. My flight's gone. Well, I did that. I got it. And they said, we'll arrange another flight. It's going to go to Panama, then down to the middle of the Amazon and Manaus, which is a big city there, and then to Belém. And, you can still make it late that next night. So I did all that, got on the plane, and that was the way it was supposed to be, because I was sitting next to Dusty Baker from Nevada City, not the Dusty Baker but his name was Dusty Baker, and he owned a gold mine down in Belém, Brazil, and he was going to visit his wife and his 2 children, and they were divorced. They lived in a mansion, and we got to talking and share. It was really a great experience. And I was an early childhood professor at that time, and teacher of young kids, and his wife was a Montessori preschool teacher. We had this great conversation. She said, you know, would you like to stay in one of my 15 rooms in my mansion? And I went, sure, because I was just going to camp out somewhere. You know, I had a backpack. I was backpacking the whole thing. So I got to stay with him and got to go in perform in this Montessori preschool with Brazilian children. It was very cool. And then his son was 19 years old and he was an environmental activist. And at that time, they were protesting the deforestation of the Amazon River, which, as you know, is continuing, especially with their current president, dictator type. And so they had this great play, outdoor play in the park, and I went with them. And so he had some good little happy smoke. He said, you want to smoke a little bit? And I said, sure. So I'd smoke some pot, watching this great show, and you know, drank a beer or two, and then I felt that kidney stone fell right into my urethra, and I'm in intense pain again. And I say, yeah, okay, what the doctor told me to do was, I'm going to try it. So I smoked some more, a couple more joints. I had 2 more beers and I had to go to the bathroom. I went in, but you know, I couldn't go, you know, your urethra was blocked. But all of a sudden, the happy little Mr. Kidney Stone burst out into this little open latrine thing. It was outside. And I felt this great pressure and I relieved. Of course, I staggered down and I did what the doctor said. He pick it up if you can, you know, save it and bring it back so we know what kind of stone it is. So they didn't know a lot about it. So I did all that. And so because of that experience, I have an offer for you. This is a medical breakthrough. And here's the offer. Since marijuana is now legal in California, and there's all these great craft breweries all over, John and I and Andrew, we've been to a few of them. I am proposing in my new company to form a kidney relief pill and a remedy for anyone who has kidney stones. So, because I ended up with 17 more kidney stones over the next 10 years, and I passed them by taking pain medication, smoking pot, and drinking beer. I had a system down. Within 2-3 hours, I passed all those 17 stones. Now, you know, fortunately, you know, they weren't too huge, and I was able to do that. But so my offer to you is to join me in this new company. And this is a medical breakthrough, and we can make millions and billions. And if you want to join me after this program here, meet me at the University of Beer in downtown Sacramento, and we will begin our journey to becoming multi-millionaire, billionaire types.
Oh, I didn't know I was coming to a comedy show this afternoon. This has been such a fun day. Our next presenter is another, I would say, more experienced. I was gonna say old timer, but we don't. We're not that. Not experienced storyteller. Terry Chekon began telling stories as a children's librarian 50 years ago. In retirement, she discovered the fun of sharing stories to adults. Aren't we lucky? From her own life. Her title today is Go West, Young Woman. Go West, Young Woman. Terry Chekon.
Well, I came to California for a visit for the first time in late June 1967 for an annual conference of the American Library Association in San Francisco. And coming from hot, humid Baltimore, being in San Francisco in June was cool, both literally and figuratively. But after my week in San Francisco, I went down to visit relatives in Southern California.
And it was fun. We did all the usual Southern California kinds of things. We went to Disneyland and we went to Knott's Berry Farm, a mission, Gene Autry's house, and the Huntington Museum. But I knew that if I was ever going to come back to California, it wasn't the southern part of California that I liked. I was Tony Bennett, and I had left my heart in San Francisco, but I figured that was it. Well, the next summer, 1968, I got to spend my vacation with a friend that I had made and her sister. They had this neat plan. They were from Amarillo, Texas, and I hope there's nobody from Amarillo here, but once you've been to Amarillo, you can see why they had this plan. They moved around the country. They started on the East Coast, stayed about 3 to 5 years, and then they'd moved someplace else. So their second choice was Denver. So I went out to see them in Denver, and we took a trip around Yellowstone. And as we're driving along, they said, you know where we're going to go next in about 1.5 years? We're going to go to the San Francisco Bay Area. You ought to come with us. Well, there wasn't any reason for me not to come, and I certainly had lots of time to prepare. And the first thing I was told was that there was a consultant with the California State Library who had once worked for the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, and she could probably tell me what kind of jobs were available. So I wrote to this lady, Miss Virginia Hughes. She wrote back, and she said there were 4 vacancies in the whole state of California in 1970, at that time, which would have been late 1969, for an experienced children's librarian. And she told me where they were. One was in San Diego, one was in Santa Barbara, and 2 were with the Sacramento Public Library. Well, I didn't know much about California geography, so I got out a map to see which was the closest to San Francisco. No contest. So I wrote to Sacramento Public Library, and they wrote back and said, when you get to California, come for an interview. So I flew out to Amarillo. We drove up through Nevada into California, past Donner Lake. In February, it was beautiful. The mountains were covered with snow. And we made our headquarters at a motel on 101 in San Mateo. And I called Sacramento Public Library, and they said, come up the next week. We set a day, and I took the Greyhound bus to Sacramento. I felt like maybe I was in the Midwest. Everything was very flat with mountains in the background. And then all of a sudden, the city sort of rose up from the what seemed to me like a prairie. And there weren't nearly as many tall buildings as there are now, but there were a few. And I don't even know how I got to library administration, because it wasn't in a library. It was in a building, on a storefront kind of building on 1930 T Street, but I got there. And I had a very nice interview with the assistant director, Mrs. Margaret Dinsmore, whose husband had the wonderful name of Darwin Dinsmore, we discovered. So you can guess who he was named for. And she was, this, as I say, the assistant director, the woman who was the coordinator of children's services, and a lady from the personnel office that seemed so old and so frail that I thought a strong wind would blow her over. It was a very nice interview. I had had much tougher interviews, believe me, going from librarian 1 to 2 to 3 back in Baltimore. And when we were done, Mrs. Dinsmore said, now we're going to go see a little bit of Sacramento. And first we went to see the library where one of the jobs was open. It was going to be a new library in South Sacramento, and it was named in honor or in memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Library. And it was going to be finished in a couple of months. So we toured that. And then Mrs. Dinsmore said, now we're going to go to a very nice section of Sacramento. Well, we did. Wide tree-lined streets, big houses, and none 2 of them alike. We were in the fabulous 40s. And then she had told me at the beginning, we're going to see this really nice area, and then we're going to go to the ghetto. Well, we drove quite a little distance. We drove into an area with smaller houses, yes, but they all had yards. And many of them had gates around, fences around the yards, gates. And it was that kind of early false spring that you get in Sacramento in late February or March. And a lot of them had flowers in the yards. And of course, I'm still looking for the ghetto. But we got back to 1930 T Street, and I was smart enough to not say, where's the ghetto? But and then they offered me the job I wanted. But the next day I had an interview scheduled with the San Francisco Public Library, and I was determined that I was going to at least interview with them. So I said I would get back to them the next day. Well, the next day I went into the city. My interview was with a fellow in the personnel office. The interview consisted of him telling me that he didn't have anything that he thought was suitable for me. So I went down to the payphone in the lobby of the Central San Francisco Library. I called Sacramento back. This time they gave me the director of the library to talk to. I hadn't even met her the day before, Miss Dorothy Drake. And when I told her that I wanted to accept the position at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library, she said, well, that position may have been taken. She said, we'll get back to you tomorrow. That night, all I could think about, as I didn't sleep, was how my money was running low. What if I didn't get that job? Because it seemed like every other library in California was very tied to the civil service. And if they weren't going to give the civil service test until next June or something, I'd definitely be out of money. And I thought, what next? But fortunately, that next day, Miss Drake called back and said, the position is still available, and they hired me. And so about a week later, I took the Greyhound again. And this time when I came to Sacramento, I came to work, and I thought, I'll stay there. I'll be like Shirley and Carol. I'll stay about 3 to 5 years, and then I'll either go back east or I'll go to some other part of the country that I might want to live in. And here I am, 51 years later.
Thank you, Terry. I hadn't heard that part of your story before. Oh, we have just been so blessed today with such wonderful stories and poems. And we have another poet today. Dennis Hawk has written 2 books on poetry: The Secret Cup, the poems of grief and healing and bringing, and the second is Bringing Birds Through Stone. Isn't that interesting? It's caught my interest. He's currently working on his 3rd book, Follow the Lame Goat Home. Today, he's going to read 3 poems that deal with my theme of change, but in some uncommon ways. Listen to the titles: Marriage Counseling, Bark Beetles, and Learning Not to Drown. Let's welcome Dennis Hawk. Dennis Hawk, let's welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Just a little bit so that I can get your whole. No, it's okay if you get just a little down. These have been some great stories. Thanks for sharing those. So maybe a little backdrop on each one is necessary. The first one, marriage counseling. But by the way, Jennifer's mentioned she was reading something that was autobiographical. This is not autobiographical. Probably most of you know that when you use the first person pronouns point of view, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the poet. It's a stylistic trait of modern romantic lyrical narrative poetry to make the psychological and emotional experience more intense rather than talking about it. So this did not happen to me. I just imagined it. So the change in the consciousness of the speaker in the poem is one from a human consciousness to an animal change. So this is going from, it's not literal, so don't be frightened. This is a figurative change to express the emotional state of one of the 2 people being counseled to save the marriage. And the counseling isn't going well. And so here's what happens. See if I can find it. Marriage counseling. I shut my eyes to hear you better, and my fingers curl into talons, while the back of my neck, scalloped in feathers, begins to bristle. Under their lids, my eyes whirl into dark diamonds, and in its chest, my heart hardens into a peach pit. You are oblivious now, but when my eyes fly open and my beak curses shred the air, you will run from the room in tears. And the therapist, he'll sit there with a look of clinical alarm as I tear the mailing labels off glossy magazines strewn across his coffee table. He'll cough just once, and my talons will bleed into the clock as the hour turns from shrill to empty.
Yeah.
The second one has been mentioned as the bark poem. And probably the context in which we hear the word change more than any other context is climate change. And so this was one of the early signs of climate change, not as quite as dramatic as some of the storms and hurricanes we're having. But if you'll remember, maybe 30 years ago, a lot of trees started turning brown and dying in our forests, especially in the Rocky Mountains and in the Sierra Northwest too. And what happens was, because of climate change, the trees weren't getting enough nourishment, enough rain. And so what happens is, if a tree doesn't get enough rain to produce sap, then these infestations of bark beetles can get underneath this bark, go in and lay the eggs and kill the trees. So I remember seeing that in the Tahoe Valley and then up near a cabin that I ended up buying. So this is called bark beetles. And I probably wrote this 20, 25 years ago. Bark beetles. As the last snow in the rock bowls gave itself up under the sun's relentless questioning, and streams slowed to trickles, the woods grew discouraged. Each evergreen began to brown. I saw this from my cabin window. Soon the forest turned blanket sepia, taupe granite above tree line, and the whole brown smear slowly sucked the blue out of the sky until it became the color of erasers. Then all birds of hue flew away, and only the drab remained, the wren, sparrow, and martin. Rasping lizards roamed everywhere, their reptilian eyes slits of hard yellow. I took up 24-hour watch, waiting for the ruby-throated hummingbird to return to the feeder nailed to the white pine outside my window. During my vigil, I rolled a green pebble under my tongue and listened for shimmering wings in the stillborn air. The old clock on the stone hearth ticked off the minutes as pine needles fluttered dryly to the ground. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the lizard scratching the rocks in the dusty riverbed. I could hear the beetles laying their eggs beneath the bark of the white pine. My mouth got dry while I was reading that. You know, I had something right there. Oh, thanks.
You gonna invite us all up to your cabin? You gonna invite us all up to your cabin?
Well, the water line broke last week or 2 weeks ago, and it's really cold up there. It's 14 degrees below. I'm not below, but 14 degrees. And there's a lot of snow. So I managed to shut it down before all that, but not quite. Yeah, enough probably. Sometimes the change that we are looking for is very hard to achieve. And it's not so much that our whole being changes, but our mode of behavior and our addictions and things like that change. And this is a story of a friend who went off to war and was badly damaged by it, the Vietnam War, and had PTSD. And he became a really chronic alcoholic. And he, you know, back in those days, so this is almost 40 years ago, you could get away with getting DUIs, and he had like 8 of them. And he was a blackout drinker, and he's just a miracle he never killed anybody driving. But the judge finally had enough and said, you got to go to a hospital and throw you in jail. So he agreed, and he was sure that it wouldn't work, to go into a 30-day program. And so he was at a bar the night before he was going in for his 30 days. And he ended up meeting, ironically, a woman who they got on well. And she said, well, will you be calling me? He said, well, I'm going away for a while. And then he told her, and she stuck with him. She was a nurse, and she was the catalyst that finally enabled him. I don't think without her, he would have done it. And it's a very happy ending. So he got out, and he's been sober for 40 years, and they have 3 kids and 2 grandkids. And so this is a kind of a tribute to that kind of big change. This is the one called Learning Not to Drown. When I wrote this book, I didn't know how to organize it into sections, so I did it alphabetically. So it's easier to find a poem that way. If I can find the L's, we'll be all right. Learning Not to Drown. My friend returned from Vietnam, a failed suicide. He'd volunteered for artillery, but managed to blow out only his hearing. All those big guns, you know. Back home, he slid below the surface and began to live with a deprivation common to swimming, as if the entire world were underwater. For 10 years, he drowned, his senses shutting down incrementally. Always a quiet one. Before long, he said virtually nothing. His eyes grew as dull as blanched marbles. But he still loved the brutal vitality of oversexed machines. On the river, he outdrank the other fish and zoomed around in his souped-up boat with beer spilling from his gills, hoping that some wandering mercy would kill him. Hitting bottom is a cliche. Those who survive are often plucked from a floating suspension in a blurry world that has no floor. So it happened with my friend. He met a stranger in a bar who sensed the beauty beneath the bloated distortion of his life. She swam to him, turned him gently on his back, her arms encircling his chest, and whispered in his ear instructions on how to breathe underwater. Thank you very much.
Wow. All 3 of those poems were very emotional and thought-provoking. Thank you so much. Andy, this is a hard act for you to follow. Our wonderful president of our Sacramento Storytelling Guild, Andrew, considers himself a gentleman farmer, working on his 5 acres to produce fruits and vegetables, which he and his wife transform into jams, jellies, preserves, and a myriad of pickled vegetables, but he left out the best, his wine. Besides being a storyteller, he is an author published Papa's Offers Stories, Positive Reflections of Life in America, and it's available on Amazon. He releases 1 story a week on his email listserv of Storytellers, and anyone can join by request. He is enjoying skill development in poetry, belongs to the Poetry Center, and has nearly finished his first draft of his first novel. That was the first I heard. He's right. So we'll all be ready with our money to buy that. He retired from the California Department of Education 4 years ago and is joining his exploration into his creative skills. Andrew Loeffler's title is Joining the Army. Joining the Army. Andrew Loeffler.
Thanks, everybody. Joining the Army was quite a change, eh? Can't you imagine? I was 38 years old when I joined the Army. You guys remember that? These are my in-laws here. 38 years old. Iraq invaded Kuwait. We were going to war. There were dire predictions everywhere. Our American life was going to change. There was going to be blood and gore everywhere. We would become a theocracy, you know, if Saddam Hussein were to take over the world and so on and so forth. I had a young child and I had a wife, and I was worried about them. What would happen to them if all these dire predictions came true? Plus, I had a nephew, JJ, and a friend, Paul, in the Army, and they were going to go to Iraq. And so even though I was 38 years old, it was like I had to do something. So I went down to the Army recruiter and I joined up. Now, I was a registered dietitian at the time. So I was going into the medical corps, and it just so happens that 38 years old is the oldest that they will take you. So I went down there and I said, you know, sign me up. And they said, well, there's no positions open for dietitians in the medical corps right now. You know, but there's a war coming, so we'll take you as a reservist. I said, oh, okay, great. Well, I don't know, thanking my lucky stars, that's the way it worked out. So they said, great, well, you can come in as an officer, as a second lieutenant, which is also called a butter bar because of the single brass bar that they have on top of the epaulet there. And so they said, but you got to go in and you got to go get sworn. You got to find your own place to get sworn in. I said, okay. My sister-in-law, who had a long career in life in the military because of herself and her husband, took me to the Army Corps of Engineers here in Sacramento, where I was sworn in. And that was a very solemn occasion for me. I really hadn't imagined the enormity of my decision to join the Army until I was standing there with my hand up like this and swearing my allegiance to the country and that I would, you know, join the Army and fight with them, even if it meant that I died. But it was very, very profound moment for me. After that, it was time for me to go to basic training. Well, by the time basic training came up, the war was over. You know, it was like, oh man, well, but I was in the Army now, right? So it's like, so they send me off to San Antonio for basic training. Well, it just so happens that my nephew JJ was there at the same time. He was a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant, and he was in a training program, him along with 900 other sergeants. So, but I was thrilled that he was there because, you know, I love my nephew and I could trusted him, and he was in the Army for a long time. So he knew all the ropes, all the etiquette you had to know. All I knew was I barely knew how to salute, you know. So anyway, he teaches me how to spit shine my boots, and he teaches me how to make the bed so it's nice and tight, bounce a quarter off of it, stuff like that. A few other things. Well, then he also decided to have a little fun at my expense. He says, hey, let's walk over across the quad to these buildings over there. Check that out. Okay. So I go walking with him. It was lunchtime, I guess. All 900 sergeants came out at the same time. Now, like I said, I barely knew how to salute. All I knew is that the lower ranking people always salute first, and then the officer always salutes back, makes eye contact and all this stuff. Suddenly a swarm of 900 sergeants come out. They're all, morning, sir. Other day, sir. Who, sir? And I'm like, I mean, I'm so overwhelmed with all this attention, and my arms going up and down like this. I felt like such an idiot. And my nephew, he starts laughing. He says, you don't have to do that. Okay, in this situation, you don't have to salute every single time. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Thanks, man. Yeah. He and 400 of the soldiers have had fun at my expense on that occasion. The medical corps, I learned in basic training, is key to an army's success. I mean, if the soldiers know that there's someone there that's going to take care of them when they get hurt, they'll fight better, they'll fight harder. So I felt good about that. And I understood that being part of the Army, I was, it was something much larger than myself. Well, the Army had another strategy to instill that feeling into us, and that was the buddy system. Now, buddy system, you get assigned a buddy in basic training, and your buddy is supposed to watch out for you always. And they're supposed to know where you are. If you go down, they're supposed to help you take you up and get you out of harm's way and into safety and things like that. So it's a real great way to understand the team mentality and to support your fellow soldiers and so on. And it really develops esprit de corps. My partner's name was Peter Williams, Pete. And we both took our charge very, very seriously. We met each other, didn't know each other at all before this, but we immediately bonded. As soon as we shook each other's hand, we immediately began to build that trust in each other. Now, Pete was about 6'2" tall and about 225 pounds, solid rock. I was all of 5'8" and maybe 160 pounds. So Pete got the short end of the stick on this one. Every morning we would always check with each other and make sure we knew what we were doing, and so we began to build that trust. And it was really easy to see that in a theater of war how you would build that trust more strongly. But anyway, if I fell in battle, Pete could take me out, pick me up, and get me out of the way, no problem. If he fell in battle, we'd be sitting ducks because there's no way I was going to be able to pick him up and take him anywhere. He'd have to assist me in doing this thing. On the last day of training, all 500 medical corps people, and the people just like me who kind of joined in a fit of patriotism, we got dismissed. And so I waited. Pete and I kind of looked for each other. We found each other to say goodbye. And he came up to me and he gave me a big hug. And I noticed tears starting to well up in his eyes, the water. And then he turned away real quick before I could see the tear drop down his cheek. Pete and I were good. We were buddies. We were brothers with a common purpose and a commitment to protect each other, all the other soldiers, and you all as well. I never got his address and we lost touch. We never kept in touch, but I'm really glad I got to meet him. It made me a better person. I stayed in the Army for about 9 years until I made captain, and then I realized that the Army really didn't need me after all. But it was a great experience that I had, and I got to go to Japan and I got to go to different places throughout the United States, and it's just experiences and an understanding of the Army that I would never have had I remained a civilian. Thank you.
Andy and I have been dealing with that pesky fly that we must taste good, Andy, because he's been bugging me too. I hate for the program to be coming to a close, but we have one of, I consider, our best tellers because she's my dear friend, or at least I call her my friend. I hope she agrees. Joyce Orman has been sharing stories with the Guild for over 22 years. Wow. And she puts time flies when you're having fun. She doesn't think she's shared this story before, but it was an adventure never to be forgotten. Due to the changes in an itinerary. Perk your ears. Her title, Tijuana Nightmare. Tijuana Nightmare, Joyce Orman.
Now, I don't know how many of you, but this story happened between 55 and 60 years ago. I was in my late 20s. I was going to Ensenada, Mexico on a road trip with my friends, Sam and Mary from Oregon, and my husband, Lamar. We were going in Sam's beloved bus. Sam had acquired a World War II Army troop carrier, and he stripped it and built what would now be called a motorhome. It was still a World War II bus. Okay. They came down, we got first light, we took off. We went down Interstate 5. I don't know if any of you went down Interstate 5 at that time. Signs like gas, next gas, 53 miles. Next service, 78 miles. There was nothing, it was straight. And I had an itinerary. I had all these wonderful things we were going to do in Mexico. And so I was playing cards and enjoying the ride on the bus. And 2.5 hours into the trip, Sam said, okay, Joyce, it's your turn. My turn to do what? To drive the bus. Sam, I can't drive this bus. It has no power steering. It has no power brakes. And it shifts in gears that I've never dealt with in my whole life. He said, that's why you're driving 4 lanes, 2 going straight. You won't see a car. That's where you're serving your 2.5 hours. Well, I ground a few gears and I built a few muscles, and I did that 2.5 hours. Luckily, it ended before we hit the grapevine. Took over. We went through Tijuana. Looked, I was excited. Down to, and we stopped at Rosarita because we were tired and it was a good place to stop. We drank beer. We hit every, I don't know, Casantina or whatever it was. We had beer. We had margaritas. We danced. We listened to music. We went back. We played cards. My husband said he had a headache and wasn't feeling well. So I gave him a couple aspirins. We all went to bed. Joyce, did you bring a thermometer? Yeah, get it. Took his temperature, 102.6. Oh. He got up, he went to the back. Sam and Mary slept in the back, right next to the inside of where it said, a 6-foot little Abner carrying Daisy May in his arms with a little of marrying Sam, the preacher. I don't know if you remember that cartoon. On top of it, it said, Mary and Sam.
Oh.
Got the picture? Okay. Lamar went back and said, Sam, we got to head back to the States. I need a doctor. I need to go to the emergency room. Sam woke up and said, they got doctors here. Lamar said, I'm not winding up in a Mexican hospital. Sam said, well, I can't drive. I'm too drunk. Mary can't drive. She's drunk too. And you got a fever. Joyce will have to drive.
Oh, great.
Driving down a straight with no turns in the daylight is a lot different than driving on a 2-lane road in the dark that weaves around. But we went, I drove, Lamar was navigating, and we did pretty well until we got close to Tijuana. And then Lamar went back to wake up Sam, to guide us through Tijuana. There aren't many signs to tell you where to go. He couldn't wake him up. So he came back and he navigated, and I said, I don't think we're going the right way. Well, we went and we followed the road. Finally, I said, I can't go any further. We are now on a dirt road slightly wider than the bus. We stopped, we got out, we were with all these little houses. People came out. They looked at the bus. They looked at the cartoons. They were interested. They wanted to help. They didn't speak English. I didn't speak Spanish. Well, he's not very much. Lamar didn't speak Spanish either. Sam and Mary were passed out in the back of the bus. I don't know if they spoke Spanish or not. Well, I heard words, the best words. Jesus español es inglés. And somebody ran off. I felt Jesus was going to come and save us. If you know how to spell Jesus in English, it's Jesus. Well, he came. His English was a little better than my Spanish. And Lamar together, we all figured out after him that we needed to get to the border. We got that much, but the directions on how to get there. Finally, in desperation, Jesus drew a map in the dirt. Go this way, fork in the road, bear to the right. We could do that. One little problem. The bus was pointed that way, and we needed to go that way. I couldn't do it. Lamar got in, and with the help of about 8 guys, back and forth, back and forth. A why turn like a clock. We were facing the right direction. We headed down, we got to the fork, we headed to the right. We went down, there were a lot of trees and stuff, but we got down out of those hills and I could see the border. It was lit up and I could see 5 or 6 lines of cars because everyone who'd been in Tijuana for Saturday night was headed home. Well, the border was there. We came down like this, and I thought we would turn and go like that. But no, the road went right in to the traffic that was going this way. We were going to have to go across 4 or 5 lanes in order to turn that bus so that we could head to the border. Well, Lamar got in because I lost all nerve. And he made it, and there was a lot of honking and waving a fist and so forth. But I think everybody figured out if they don't get across, nobody's going anywhere. So they let us in. And the border was still a mile or so, you could just barely see it. And so it was go a little bit and stop, go a little bit and stop. Took forever. So again, Lamar laid down. I went and sat down in the bus. I couldn't manage this. I only had to go a few feet at a time. So we're getting close to the border now. So Lamar goes back to talk to Sam to make sure we have all the paperwork we need and the registration for the bus. We knew we needed that. And so Sam told him where it was, and he said, oh, don't worry. When we get to the border, they're going to tear this bus apart. And so Lamar comes back. He has a funny look on his face. He says, I have the papers. And I said, what's wrong? He said, well, Sam says when we get to the border, they're going to tear this bus apart. Why? I said. Drugs, he said. I'd never been arrested. I'd never been in jail before. And I certainly didn't want to wind up in a Tijuana jail. But Sam and Mary never did drugs. Red bus, cartoons on the back. Sam and Mary had 5 very wild, rambunctious teenagers from the age of about 20 to about 14. They might have something in the bus. So right about now, I lose my composure. My itinerary for this trip is completely demolished. I am now breaking into sobs. I'm trying to drive this bus and I am crying and I'm still picturing me with my head in the Tijuana jail. I've never even gotten a parking ticket. We are one car. There's one car in front of us. Lamar has taken over because he's afraid with my sobbing and so forth that we might not make it through the border. And about that time, I'm looking and thinking, and all this, the car in front of us, they are going through the trunk and looking under the car and going through the wheels and taking off the hubcaps. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Anyway, just about the time they seem like they're finished, the whole thing blows up in front of us. Their radiator exploded. Guards with guns drawn and the whole thing goes up. Now I'm really, who do you call when you're in a Tijuana jail? Do they give you a phone call? And then everything calms down. Everybody realizes it's just the radiator that's exploded, I guess. And they all go away. And the officer in charge comes to the side of the bus and steps up the steps. And Lamar gives him the papers. He speaks English. And we talk a little bit. Lamar tells him that we have to go back because he's ill and so forth. And all the paperwork, everything's there. He goes to the back of the bus and looks at Sam and Mary, who are still passed out in their bed. He comes back. He hands us back the paperwork. He says to me, "What did you purchase?" And they're still in the bags. I open and show him the bags. And he stands at the edge of us and he says, "Lamar, do you think you can push this car through and push it over there to the side?" And Lamar said, "Yeah." And they get out and they check the bumpers and okay. And so Lamar starts up very slowly. We push the car till it gets out of the way. And then we back up and Lamar takes off down the highway. And I'm screaming, "Stop, stop. They're going to get us. They're going to chase us. They're going to get me in jail." And I look and he said, "Forget it. Relax. I'll just tell him I misunderstood the directions." I kept watching for sirens and so forth. None. We stopped at the first motel that we could find that had a vacancy sign, pulled in. Lamar and I got up, took our stuff, wrote a note to Sam and Mary, put it on the steering wheel, hid the keys where you're supposed to, went into the motel. We got up in the morning. Sam and Mary had gone back to Mexico. Lamar's fever had broken. We got transportation to San Diego airport and we flew home. Nothing on that trip was on my itinerary. I have been to Mexico many, many times. Believe me, there is no trip that I've ever taken that I remember as well as that one.
I have known Joyce for those about 20 years, and I have never heard that story. Good. Oh, that was so humorous. I hope you all enjoyed today's program. I sure did, and I was just introducing everybody. I want to let you know next month theme, and Joyce is going to be our hostess next month, is seasonal frolicking. Oh, that just leaves it open to many enjoyable stories. But two other things I need to tell you for the Guild. Number one is we are voting people onto our executive board, and we have 2 positions open. Please, please if you would like to be on the board, nominate yourself. We'd love that. Or if you could think of someone else that might be a good board member, please put in a nomination with their name. We want to have more people to be involved with our guild. And second thing to tell you that we're all so excited about, and mark your calendars for May 20th, 2023. Sacramento Valley is going to have their first storytelling festival. Now, they've had festivals in Auburn, festivals in Sierra, festivals in the Bay Area. Even I think Lodi has a festival, but Sacramento Valley has never had a festival. And look at how big and proud we are. So we are having our first festival. It's right here in town at the Dante Club. So mark your calendars now. We're going to be hopefully have our tickets ready for January. And we look forward to seeing you all and hope that you will attend that and keep coming back to our guild, because it's no better than telling stories to an audience. And Ed, you had.
Sure. So tomorrow, our organization is joining with another story swap group called the Inland Valley Storytellers from the Lancaster, Visalia area. And each of us, it's a joint celebration put on by the Storytelling Association of California. Each group supplies an MC and 4 tellers, and it will be tomorrow. If you haven't
On Zoom.
got a flyer, it's on Zoom.
Right.
If you haven't got a flyer, we can send you one. You just log on. There's no fee or anything, and you'll get to hear you'll get to hear John from our group. Andrew's going to be the tech person. I'll be the MC, and then we have 3 of our other tellers that
Yes.
aren't here.
Nope.
Okay.
Joyce and I aren't
Yeah.
telling this one.
3 other tellers from our group that are excellent storytellers. And then the other group has 4 tellers that are really well known. And one of them's a international storyteller that's been telling for 30, 40 years at major festivals all over the world. So it'll be a great event. It's from 3 to 5 tomorrow. And we have your emails or anything. Well, when I get home, I'll send you the flyer if you've already got it. Just log on tomorrow.
Yeah.
In between 2:30 and 3.
I think there's also a connection if they go to Storytellers Association of California. There's also a link.
Yeah, there's a
there.
link.
There's a link there, and there's a link on our website.
On our own
Sacramento
website.
Storytellers Guild.
Yes.
There's a link there. You can just go to that and
Yeah.
join us. It's a lot of fun.
So for those who maybe couldn't hear, the celebration is tomorrow from 3 to 5. It's a Zoom link. You can go on our Sacramento StorytellersGuild.org and you can make the connection to that. And 4 of our tellers will be telling besides 4 of the Inland Storytelling Group. Thank you.
One last thing. One quick. So Celebration is a national storytelling event that started in 1979, and storytelling groups all over the United States celebrate the art of storytelling. And they put on free events all throughout the country. And so there's lots of great events, and we're just part of that.
Thank you, Ed. I could tell Ed is our liaison. He is a member of the board, but he is our liaison with the State Storytelling Association. So thank you, Ed, for that information. Thank you again for all being here. Hope you're going to have a happy Thanksgiving. Look forward to seeing you next month for seasonal frolicking.
That's a great time.